Yeah, Mark, you probably deal with this more. I mean, Ohio. I talked with Bronson a little bit about this because he had brought up fire for what we were talking about with deer, and I just said, I mean, Ohio, man, we just don't burn a lot. I mean, I know the state does, okay, but fire is just not utilized near as much. And I don't know if that's because of how urbanized Ohio is. I mean, I really don't know. I think a lot of it has to do with a cultural thing. I think people just don't think about it, and understand that that's a component. So I think there's a little bit of, everything kind of mixed in there. But how often does the state actually, do you guys use fire?
You bring up some excellent points. I don't think prescribed fire is part of our culture here, like we see in some of the South,
Yeah.
particularly Western states. So that's one issue. And Smokey the Bear, he did too.
It's great propaganda.
Everybody that fire is bad. I mean, for important reasons at the time, but now we've got to kind of rein that in a little bit and emphasize some of the values of fire, controlled fire, prescribed fire. You are correct. The state does utilize prescribed fire, not only in forested systems, but in grassland systems in every opportunity that we can. We're very limited by weather conditions and timing. I mean, we've got a pretty narrow window. Our fire crews have a narrow window in which we can actually execute those fires, and a lot of hurdles to jump through to get fire on the landscape. But as Marcus was describing, some of the benefits not only of various forest management activities, but adding fire to that. I'm thinking of some of our southeastern public lands, heavily forested lands, where oak is our emphasis for wildlife habitat. It's managing not only a healthy forest system, but trying to get oak back on the landscape the way that we likely had a long time ago. And fire was probably the reason for that centuries ago. So I was actually thinking of a turkey habitat program we put on a few months ago, and we basically had one field stop for not only wildlife professionals and foresters that were interested in wild turkey habitat, but we took some landowners out there to show what can be done. And we went to one of our publicly owned forested areas, and it was a shelter woodcut where we've had recurring prescribed fire. And essentially we're managing for oak. And what you had is a broken canopy of mature oaks that are providing that mast resource. And then underneath, because you have that broken canopy and that sunlight, which Marcus describes vitally important to creating that ground level cover, we had what we considered to be excellent nesting and brood rearing cover down below. And hopefully, centuries down the road, decades down the road, maybe a century down the road, we've got those young oaks that are going to become the mature oaks and replace what we have now and be good acorn producers in the future. And as you said, we've got to move on to a new area, create that understory in a nearby spot so that those poults don't have to go 500, 700 meters to get to good brooding areas. So for Ohio, really, I see oak management as the best strategy for forest management for wildlife, including the wild turkey.
Yeah. And in that shelter wood with fire technique, most people, when I talk to them about that, they don't quite understand the ecology that's going on in that. So if you have, the frequency, what frequent means would change depending on where you're at. But if you have recurring fire, there are basically what you're doing is shifting favor to species that benefit from fire. Like they have adaptations to be more competitive in that condition than other species. So if you have recurring fire, a lot of our upland oak species that are really common across, some of these stands, they have characteristics that actually promote fire. The way that their leaves curl and the way that they build the leaf substrate are more flammable, promote fire. And we have a whole bunch of other species like your maples and elms, depending on where you're at, things like that are more mesic species they are disfavored by fire, and they have a suite of characteristics that dampen they literally dampen the forest. They create a higher moisture environment. Their leaves tend not to curl and create that fluffy litter, that would be the fuel for the fire. And what you see in that kind of scenario is if you don't have fire in it, you don't shift favor to those species that benefit from fire, and you'll have essentially you set succession on a different trajectory. And we've seen that across a lot of the eastern hardwood forests. And I've been a part of a big research team that have scientists that, from Penn State to Mississippi State to Florida, up in, into Minnesota. Like, we've got scientists all over the place that are working together on this idea of mesification, where the forest is literally transitioning into a less flammable state because of that lack of fire. And I think that's really important for people to understand. It's providing that short-term benefit of, providing really good nesting and brooding structure, but also that process is setting the trajectory of the forest for the future of what that forest will look like and what that composition will look like, what trees will actually make it into the canopy and be, that older tree is being determined at that young stage.
Yeah, and for people listening to this, some people are probably like, "Oh my God, like how do we do it?" Well, a chainsaw works really well, but you have to understand what trees that you're actually looking at, right? And there's plenty of. I'm actually working on filming a couple of segments of some content on a property that I got access to.
Okay.
So I'm going to do some timber, kind of content on that, but I'll talk more about that in the video. But there are plenty of apps out there. You don't have to do it the old school way that we all learned in school, keying out plants with a book and, looking at leaf structure. Is it world? Is it, whatever, that type of thing. Now you have these apps that are actually pretty good. They use AI and you can, pretty accurately, determine what tree you're dealing with. And then, learning how to take a little chainsaw and learning how to girdle. You don't have to fell every tree, right. So it's not as difficult as what people think it is. I think some people make the mistake of not understanding too much, and they go in there and try to fell a tree in a closed canopy system and go, well, that just got hung up.
Yeah.
Now they're going, I think everyone's been there, right. But it's not as difficult as what it sounds, is opening up that canopy.
I'm glad you're creating some resources like that. I've worked with a bunch of people on forest stand improvement content. Yeah. The one professor at Purdue he went through the same lab with me, and he's done some up in that, that region with hardwood management. But yeah, just forest stand improvement can go a long way, and you probably have some situations where you have quite a few trees that are just frankly not worth much. So, but they may be hindering you substantially from doing things that you want to do. Yeah,
I got a lot of beech around me.
Yeah, that's a good example of one that's hindering you. That's also not valuable.
So just being able to teach people, like, again, how to take a diameter of a tree and understanding why that's important on putting trees into a size class and saying, hey, I've got this oak tree that's 20 inches in diameter, breast height, to say, okay, I want to do a release. Well, old Forster's trick, okay, you double or go 1.5, so 30 feet from that tree, and take everything out from underneath there and really open up that tree back to start exhibiting secondary growth or getting wider, so that resources are promoting the maturity of that tree and more crop production and things like that. It's that simple. You go with an immature, something that most of that stuff's probably like 6 to 8 inches in diameter. You can cut that down and push it with your hand, with a chainsaw, and you can really do a lot of good just by opening up those small areas, by targeting a few trees each year, if that's the way that you have to do it. Because again, don't burn in here. And like Mark said, you know, Ohio is not known for its consistent weather. I think it's supposed to be like 70 on Thursday, then drop back down to 30 on Friday, you know, type of thing. So, you know, the burning window is very, very small, and, you know,
Well,
it's hard to do.
another thing just to add to that, that it's even smaller because of that forest transition.
Yeah.
The suite of conditions that stand would be flammable in as an open forest type that's primarily dominated by litter from species that are pyrophytic, that like fire. That the range of times when that is flammable is far different than a closed canopy hardwood system that has a lot of maples and beeches and that sort of stuff in it. Like they're not even on the same planet in terms of when you can burn and under what circumstances. And, you know, that really is limiting the opportunity for that practice. You know, especially up there, it's even more limited.
And whatever your interest in forest management on a private property, I would encourage anybody to seek help. Typically, your state forest agency or state wildlife agency have folks that can come and evaluate properties. I know that's the case in Ohio. We have wildlife management consultants that'll visit properties and provide guidance. And then we have state foresters as well, if your interest is more in timber production, but they have wildlife knowledge as well. So yeah, a lot of times I have to think that in every state there's somebody that can provide you some more hands-on guidance, if on-site guidance, and seek that out.